Today we're going to build up a part of Rio Paulo that I've struggled to build realistically in the past, and that's where we transition from the really hardcore industry, in this case it's down at the port, and just into the general city. How do we sort of do that realistically? I'd also like to try and do something really unique down here. Maybe we can come up with an idea that helps us sort of theme the whole area a certain way. And there was one thing in particular that came to mind, but there was another idea that I had that we're going to start with here. Now, I love abandoned stuff. Whether it's old train tracks, maybe it's an old highway, I really love being able to see the remnants of that old infrastructure. And with one look, you may be able to tell, for instance, why the new roads in the immediate area may have been added or upgraded. And I guess all of that really just underlines the fact that cities are organic, growing things. So, without further ado, we are going to build an old airport here. My thoughts with this are maybe it was just a domestic airport or whatever, just a smaller airport, and maybe it's been abandoned for say 40 or 30 years, something around that sort of time. And maybe it's been relocated because the core of the city's just growing out so close to the airport. And this was what I meant about coming up with an idea or a theme for the whole area, because now that I've decided I'm going to do an old airport, then all of a sudden I've got all of these other ideas that might supplement it. So I would like to start with the old runway to begin with. All of the roading, all of the buildings around here are basically going to follow off of that same angle, and eventually we're going to have different parts of the runway still seen. I'd like to try and make it look like these areas just weren't cost effective to rip up all the old tarmac, and it didn't really make much sense because it was just going through non-important areas. In this case, that non-important area is pretty much the rail yard. I've had to move it a little wee bit, so we have to connect these lines back up, and this is where the old tarmac is going to be most visible. So before we move on to any buildings, let's get this rail yard completely done. Eventually I'm going to change what you're seeing me do here to something I think that fits way better that you're going to see real soon. But my thinking at the moment was this was just sort of an extension of that rail yard. I was kind of hoping to make all of this area just look like new industry basically. And that's when I realized that something just didn't quite add up here, and we're going to talk about that soon. I really like the way that detailing came out, but unfortunately none of that is going to make the final cut. So I had another idea here to try and help the old runway stand out a little bit, and that was to try and make it look like it came out here and was sitting on a little bit of reclaimed land. So obviously the airport was here well before the port, or this part of the port here, and with the airport no longer in use, this part of the port here that the runway used to sit on will just be repurposed to probably just general industry. So it's time to change up this area here and make this more realistic. Once I'd finished all that detailing, I kind of realised that there's no way they would remove an airport just to put more dirty industry in. That just doesn't make any sense at all. I think it would make more sense if a part of that runway had been repurposed into a main boulevard or a main road, because at the end of the day, the airport's been removed because the core of the city is growing this way. That's one of those moves that I'm so glad that I made. That makes so much more sense. It looks way better already, and we're still going to be able to make out exactly where the runway went. We're not actually losing anything. I'd love to know what you guys thought of that move in the comments, and if there was a way that maybe I could make it even more realistic. This also gives us a chance to put some more roads in here as well, because we're going to have a lot of traffic come through this area. That boulevard is actually going to be one of the main connector roads in the city, and we're also going to bring our tram or light rail down here eventually as well in this episode. So this layout gives us plenty of room to run that track. We're going to run it in some pretty cool spots. And actually, I think I'm probably only 3 or 4 episodes away from actually getting a video out of the tram loop around the city, which I'm really excited to do. I have spent a lot of time detailing the heck around that line the whole way around the city, and in this episode I'm going to detail that tram line up massively. But for now, I'm just going to get these roads in, and it's not going to be all of them, it's just going to be sort of the main ones for now. We can add in little alleyways as we go. But the time has come to start putting some of these buildings in, and we're going to start with some of the older buildings, or buildings that I want to represent aged areas. So what I'd like to do here is make it look like some little industry buildings that were around when the airport was here are still here. Obviously, they're going to be buildings that weren't really in the way of any new infrastructure. They were probably part of the rail yard or something like that, but in real life, most of these little industry buildings are just that. They're very small. They're very compact. They're often wall to wall, and most importantly, they look old. They represent that age, which is exactly what we want. These are going to be scattered amongst some pretty contemporary, new, very shiny looking buildings, and I'm really desperate to get that contrast between old and new. So we're going to see the density of these little industrial buildings get less and less the closer it creeps to town, although I'd like to make one block really close to town look really old, and maybe it's still being used for something. And remembering too that we're following that Brazilian flavour, I'm going to turn most of these roofs to like a terracotta. Not all the same colour, but they're all going to be sort of around that reddy orangey colour. And once I've got most of those buildings in, I'm going to add a lot of detail down here. I really love detailing these areas up because they're so visible. A lot of the times they're open and you can see around the buildings very clearly, and there's already a lot of great props in the game for making areas look detailed, especially these industrial areas. I think that looks pretty cool. It's not super obvious where it is, but once you've seen it, you can't really unsee it. And that's pretty perfect, I think. So the first block we're going to build here on the boulevard is going to be that one I mentioned earlier that's going to represent the real old part of this area. This wasn't in the way of any of the new infrastructure, although it would have been industry that was very close to the airport. So my thoughts are it was probably a part of the airport and it's just been repurposed now into, I don't know, maybe office space or maybe it's just commercial space. In any case, I'm going to use those little wee European themed commercial buildings. I think they're actually hotels or motels within game. Use the Better Bulldozer mod to get rid of all of the peripheral props around them. Use the Recolor mod to recolor them to more of that terracotted roofed and light coloured facade look. And then finally with Anarchy, we can move them really close together, wall to wall in this case. Before we add any more buildings in here, I'd like to bring the light rail through. I have been reminded often by Brazilians in the comments that the tram or the light rail is a very popular method of transportation in Rio. So I'm going to take some time to make sure that tram line runs around here pretty realistically. Some sections of it are going to be using the existing roadway, and other times the line's going to be a dedicated tram line. One of my main goals with the series is to have that line very detailed, like I mentioned earlier, because when I eventually make the tram ride video, I want it to be very realistic. I want it to stand out like a sore thumb when you're going through a bad neighborhood. I want you to feel the vibe of, I don't want the tram to stop here, and then, maybe 2 minutes later, you're going past a really beautiful beach. And the only way to really achieve that is to add a lot of detail to these areas. So you can see here we've put all the buildings in. I haven't added any detail. We're going to do that together right now, but these buildings took a while and you didn't miss anything. I used exactly the same method I used in the last block. We've got a really nice mix of old and new buildings here. And I've also been studying Google Earth a little bit more closely to try and up the realism, and I've noticed that some of the buildings are just white, including the roofs, so I may have actually been going overkill with the terracotta roofs, but there's always room for improvement. So before we move on to that detailing I mentioned, we're just going to put in the last of the buildings here up against this boulevard. We are now transitioning into some real big boys. These are some big skyscrapers. We are slowly making our way towards the CBD, and the buildings are going to apex, crescendo, whatever you want to call it. They're going to slowly get larger as we get towards that core. So let's have a look at our checklist at the moment. Have we got all the buildings in? Check. Have we got the tram lines in? Check. Now we can spend stupid amounts of time detailing all of this up. really can't wait to see the tram coming down this road. We've got so much detail here now. The last thing to do is pretty much just detail up this tram stop here. Not all of the tram stops are going to have this sort of detail, but this one here, I think this will become sort of really popular. It's on a really main street, and there's going to be a lot of buildings around here that have an attractiveness that people are going to want to go and check out. There's a decent part of that tram line that runs on a dedicated line down a really narrow back alley. This was all sort of done by design because I'd like that tram line to go down some areas that really show off the underbelly of the city, the places that really aren't to be seen or can't be seen unless you're on these lines in a tram. Down here you'd expect to see a lot of graffiti, a lot of dirt, a lot of grime. There's probably a lot of crime that goes on behind here. There's broken bottles everywhere, there's trash overflowing, people are just abandoning old beds and furniture down here. And I can just imagine coming along here on the tram and going through areas like this, and then 2 minutes later, like I mentioned earlier, you're going through a really beautiful part of the city, and it's like you can see that they just paint a pretty face on some parts of the city and other parts are just left to rot. And with that, this is as far as we're going to take this part of the city for now. We are going to carry on transitioning that industry out into the city, but now we're going to do it a little bit differently. In the real life Rio, there's a part that's close to the port where an entire hill is covered by favelas. That's exactly what we're going to do right here. This hill is very close to downtown as well, and it should offer some awesome contrast to all the big skyscrapers. So if you guys have been following the series, you'll know that I've been changing the way that I make these favelas quite considerably. So basically we just started with a square wooden box or the carport within game and scattered them around with some props between them. Then we upgraded to adding like decals on them for windows and things like that. But we are really going to the next level here. I am going to make every single one of these buildings individually, including all the windows, the patio areas. There's going to be aerials, satellites on the roofs. Some are going to have chairs and tables, some might have like little wee pools, and they're all going to be recolored to more appropriate colors that we see in real life. I've also got the Control C mod now, which means that I should be able to make these down here and then just copy them all over the hillside. This is going to save me a ton of work. Like, I don't know if I have the patience to do this without being able to copy them. So I'm going to make 3 basic models down the bottom here. We're going to detail the crap out of them and then we'll just transfer them over to that hillside like I mentioned. Man, I swear the lag trying to transfer these over almost burnt my house down. And I hate to say it, but the copy function has not worked. It seems that the height value for the props is reset to ground level, so that's just not going to work at all. And at this point I was really torn as to do I even go through with the area? Like, we're talking well over 100 custom made buildings here. There's probably way more than 100 to be honest, and yeah, like I mentioned, I just don't know whether I've got the patience to do it by hand. But you know what? I'm so desperate for this area within game, and I just know that it's going to look good that bugger it, we're doing it by hand. Oh, you thought we were done there? No, we are just getting started. So all up, you're looking at about 15 hours work there, and I'm immensely proud of this. I think it looks fantastic, and it's probably the most custom thing I think I've ever built in Citieskylines. I've tried to follow the real life model of these favelas as closely as possible, so you can see they're much brighter colour now. There's footpaths and stuff between them all, and they kind of just make more sense with their layout. It's just a real shame that we can't actually add any type of functionality to this area. Like, you'll see the odd person walking through the paths, but they're really just walking over to the port. But at this point, that's a small complaint. I think this looks so good, and the contrast with the surrounding area looks great too. So we'll have a good look at this from all different angles, and then we're going to carry on with the last bit of transitioning from that industry area to the city. And this is basically just going to be some old abandoned lots. I would actually like to have this lot be built into something eventually, so maybe this is a real construction site within our game. I'd actually really love some suggestions from you guys as to what we could put down here eventually. So, a funny story, guys. I was supposed to have this episode out like a week ago, and I had recorded all the audio and then finally went to put the episode together, and I found out that my microphone had stuffed out and all of the audio was no good. So I had to race off this morning, go and get a new microphone and put this all together so I can get it out for you guys. So I'm sorry that it's taken a while to get here. And also, if my microphone levels are a bit different than normal, then there's probably going to be some teething issues there until I get that right as well. But thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with me today and watching the episode. If you've enjoyed it, I always appreciate a thumbs up. It helps get my videos out to more people as well. And if you're not subscribed to me, then I would love you to consider doing that. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed the episode. I've certainly enjoyed making it, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Look after yourselves, guys. I'll see you later.